Thanks for tuning in to Timbercraft Chronicles. My name's Mike, and today we're going to go over how to make a tapered leg. And this tapered leg could be for a stand like this, or it could be furniture, a number of different applications. Recently I was hired by a local restaurant to provide this stand. And with this stand, it's actually a syrup pump station, so it'll hold about 6 bottles. Not stained or finished yet, but just got it built. And along with that order, the customer also ordered one of these. Now this is going to hold food storage bins. And during the process of making this, I realized that I wanted to stick with the same design using the tapered legs and put those same tapered legs on this as well. So I thought I'll just go ahead and make a video and kind of walk through the steps of how to go about making a tapered leg because it's kind of a universal application. You can use it, like I said, for stands like this or for furniture, for multiple different items. During the process of making the tapered leg, we will have to make a simple jig like this, which just requires a couple of clamps from Amazon. I'll include links below for all the products that we use in the video for an easy purchase for you guys. And that's it, yeah, so we'll go ahead and get started and walk you through the steps.
So the first step in creating the tapered leg is to create the tapered leg jig, and that's what we're going to be doing right now. As you can see here, I just have a standard old fence picket. This is about $3 at the big box stores. Super cheap. That is really all you need. Now I'm going to make this tapered leg jig about 20 inches long. Now there's no set length. You certainly want to have it long enough to where it's going to help, it's going to support the piece of wood that you're cutting. But there's no set length. You can kind of do whatever you want, but I'd recommend at least close to is about as long as your table saw, the top of your table saw. So we'll go ahead and take the measurements here. We'll just mark it right at 20. And we'll cut it on the table saw using my crosscut sled here.
So now that we have our cedar fence picket cut to the right length, what we're going to do before we secure and drill the holes to secure the clamps on, what we're going to do is go ahead and just give this a quick sand. It doesn't have to be perfect at all, but we just want to knock off the rough edges and make sure that the board is going to actually go nice and evenly across your table saw. I just don't want to have any hang-ups or anything getting stuck on you, so you always want to give it a quick sand. Alright, so now we've sanded our fence picket, our cedar fence picket. By the way, I used an orbital sander here. It's a skill I found it also on Amazon. I'm using 60 grit paper, and which does a great job. No reason to go up any higher than that. You're just trying to knock off anything that's rough or anything that would cause your jig to not slide nicely across your table saw. One other thing to keep in mind here as well is you want to make sure that the piece of wood that you have has a straight edge, that it's not wobbled or bowed or anything like that. Now, oftentimes what you'll do is use a planer or a joiner to make sure that edge is perfectly straight. But a lot of the fence pickets that you buy, they come with at least one straight edge on them. As you can see here, I have a perfectly square edge right here. This is the edge that I will use to run against the fence of the table saw. Alright, so now that we have our jig sanded down, the next step of this is going to be to drill a couple of holes in this wood to hold the brackets in place. Now what we want to do when we do that is make sure that the holes that we drill are big enough for the screw to slide through. But also, we want to make sure that this metal piece of the bottom of the bracket doesn't sit on the outside of the wood, causing it to rub against the table saw. We want to actually recess that a little bit down into the wood. So what we're going to do that is use what's called a Forstner bit. And so this will allow me to cut down into the wood, kind of a recessed hole into the wood, what you want to do when you do this is we'll start with these holes, and you want to only go maybe about halfway down the bit. You just kind of eyeball it. You don't want to go all the way through, just a little bit through, and then we'll finish that off by drilling the hole to fit the bolt through. So I'll show you here in just a moment. So we'll just start here, and you can pick arbitrarily. You know, I like to kind of go to maybe a couple inches in from each side, and maybe somewhere right around the middle. That'll give us the most versatility with the clamps, with using the clamps. And it kind of gives you an idea of what that looks like. We'll do the same on the other side. There we go. Now it's really important to use the Forstner bit first, because what happens if you go to drill the hole, this Forstner bit's not going to have anything to grab onto, so it's going to jump all over the place on you. So you definitely want to do these holes first, and then what we'll do is to continue that through, we'll use our larger drill bit. Now remember, we want this screw to slide all the way through easily. So in this case, I'm using actually a 1/2-inch drill bit to allow this to fall through. And you can see here on these Forstner bit holes that there's already kind of a little pre-drill right there that's left over from the bit itself, the tip of the bit. And so what we'll do is we'll just put the drill bit right there at that pre-drilled hole and just go all the way through it. What we'll do is we'll put this on. You can see here, this is going to go through and stop, but also be recessed down underneath. And then back over the top. So now our jig is created. So now let's use it. Okay, now that we have our jig built, what we're going to want to do next is, I'll go ahead and explain how this works. Essentially, you want to kind of pin this jig between the fence and the blade, not too tight. You still want it to be able to run through easily, but be right up against it. So once you're there, you go ahead and lock the fence down. And now the point of doing this, of making this jig, is so that you can attach wood at different angles, allowing you to make different angled cuts. So basically, since we've butted this jig up against the saw blade, wherever we start, you know the saw blade's going to be right up against this edge. So if you put this piece, or this edge, or corner of the piece of wood up against the edge of this jig, then, and go ahead and lock it down, show you how that ends up cutting, but you can see how it's going to just cut straight along the edge of this jig, so you'll end up with a piece that has an angle to it. Okay, so the next step we want to take is to go ahead and cut our legs. Now these legs right here, these are actually 2 pieces of wood. So we took 2 1¼ inch strips of cedar fence picket, and we put them together, and I think you probably hopefully be able to see that in the camera, but we put them together. So the first thing we need to do with this is match the size of these legs. So we're going to go ahead and cut a couple of strips, rip a couple of strips of 1¼ inch cedar fence pickets. We're going to go ahead and measure out 1¼ inches from the front of the saw blade, making sure that 1¼ inch is on the inside of the blade, not on the outside. So this will be 1¼ inch here, and we're at 1¼ inch here. We'll lock it down.
it's also a good idea too, whenever you're working with a table saw, to make sure that your saw blade it needs to be above the wood that you're cutting, but not too far above. So the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and measure my height of the stand that already has the tapered legs on it. What I'm going to do is measure from the ground up to the base of the stand. So we're looking at about 7 3/4. I want to make sure that I match that height and the leg length that I cut for the other stand. So as I'm measuring for these, I have my leg height from the ground up, and it's measuring at 7 3/4. However, I also need to take into account the height of this back support and how high up do I want that leg to go on the back support. So if I want to come up to here to cover those screws, right, which I want to do, it's going to look nicer, then I have to factor this height in as well and add that to the 7 3/4 inches. So that's what I'll be doing. So we're at 7 3/4 inches plus 2 1/4, which gives our leg length a total of 10 inches. So now we want to match the leg taper from these legs here to the new tapered legs. So the way to do that is to start with measuring at the top where there is no taper, right? So we're at 1 1/4, and then we come down here and measure at the very bottom, and we're at 3/4 at the very bottom. So we've reduced the width by 1/2 inch, and I'll show you exactly how we can line that up on the new jig that we just built. Okay, so if we want to taper the leg down in size from its original size of 1 3/4 down to 3/4, we need to reduce that, or hang over at the end here, we need to hang over about 1/2 inch. And that'll bring us down to 3/4. So we can start here at the top where it's completely flush with the edge of this jig. And then what we'll do is we'll come down here at the bottom and we'll swivel it out 1/2 inch so that only 1/2 inch is remaining on the board. And then we'll clamp it down. So that's on there good and solid, it's not going anywhere. Now the other thing to make mention of is while you're using this jig, you want to make sure all the clamps are secure. You don't want this happening while you're cutting. That's very dangerous. This will hit the blade and cause big problems. So you want to make sure everything is clamped down tight, use safety precautions, safety glasses, all that good stuff. Okay, I also want to wait for that saw to stop all the way before you move the wood, because you could end up nicking it and cause a kickback. So that's pretty dangerous. Okay, so we got our first angled leg, and what we're going to do is we're going to obviously sand these pieces down, but we're going to join them like this, and you end up with a nice tapered leg. And that's how we do that. So we'll go ahead and step through the rest of the process as well. Okay, so now that we've got all of our stand legs measured and cut and sanded, we're ready to go ahead and assemble them, so stick around. Alright, so the first thing that we're going to do is go ahead and glue these together. I'm just going to put on just a little bit of, just a light bead. You don't want to have a lot of excess running out on you. Once you have them glued in place, you want to be real quick to wipe off any excess glue. It just makes it a lot easier for the cleanup afterward. Now, as I started to put these together, I used the brad nailer on one of them, and I have some excess nails kind of sticking out. Didn't really go in the way I wanted it, so I found that the clamps worked a little better for this application, so I'll have to fill one of them to make sure that you can't see any of the brad nails or holes or anything like that. But just using the glue and the clamps is more than enough. Actually, once this dries, the wood will break first before the glue actually snaps. So it's very, very, very strong. Okay, so now as you're gluing these legs up, you want to make sure that you take into account the way that they're going to be positioned on the piece itself. So you want to have them going opposite each other. So these are the two front legs, these are the two rear legs. In other words, you don't want to have it going the other way around. So just kind of pay attention to that as you start to put these legs together. That's going to really help you quite a bit. And yeah, so now we just have to wait for this to dry up, and we'll come back and attach it to the unit.
Okay, so our legs have dried from the glue up process, so now we're going to go ahead and get them sanded down and filled in and attached to the stand. So the reason we want to sand these down is to eliminate any overage here. You could see this top lip was sitting just a little bit above right here, so we just want to kind of smooth everything out. We'll fill this stuff in too as well with some glue and some sawdust, and just get off any residual glue as well. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and countersink holes at the top of these legs. So if you can imagine this sitting up against the stand, we want to have screws going into the sides right there. So we're going to go ahead and do some countersink holes with the countersink bit. Now the next thing we want to do is make sure that when we measure to account for this height of this back brace, this is, if you remember earlier, this is where we want to kind of stop that leg, you know, right at the top, right there. So if we flip this around, you'll notice that this piece is a little bit taller. So what we want to do is go ahead and make that mark, and I did that right here at 2 1/4 inches up, and that's where we'll stop the leg here, and that way we can make sure that the legs have the same height. All right, before we attach the leg, we're going to go ahead and apply a little bit of glue to the inside here, and then go ahead and screw the leg down. And we'll do that on all 4 corners, and then let it dry out. Okay, so here we have the finished tapered legs attached to the stand, the food tray stand, and you can see here I just used a router, a palm router on the outside with a round over bit, just to kind of go down, but you can kind of see the idea and how it works. So that's how you go about making a tapered leg.